Do French presidents do second acts? After becoming the first in 2 decades to win re-election, Emmanuel Macron now has to convince enough voters to once again give him a mandate in next month's legislative elections. A centrist who this time has to face an unusually united left, Macron has to convince the electorate to stick with liberal reform while trying to shed his too clever for his own good image. Enter Elisabeth Borne, the 61-year-old Labour minister promoted to PM. How big a deal is the nomination of France's first female prime minister in 30 years? Cast of the same technocratic mold as Macron, originally from the socialists. She served as environment minister in a previous life. Enough boxes ticked to soften the moderate left? All this begs the broader question of what France wants. Under Macron, it's already been through a transport strike, the Yellow Vest movement, COVID, and now the war in Ukraine. What are citizens expecting from their leadership and their government in times that are more uncertain than ever? Today in the France 24 debate, can Macron renew himself? Joining us from Brussels, Sandro Gozzi, member of the European Parliament from Emmanuel Macron's newly renamed Renaissance Party. Are you saying Renaissance in English, or do you say renew? How do you? What is best?
Renaissance, of course.
Renaissance. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks as well to Léa Chamboncel, host of the French politics podcast Popol, and the author of More Women in Politics.
Good evening.
Topical subject. We'll talk about it in a moment. Clea Chakravarti is the politics editor at the news website The Conversation.
Yes,
absolutely. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Josine Weber, research analyst at the German Marshall Fund think tank. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, and good evening.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. The only time before that France ever had a female prime minister. She lasted all of 11 months. Edith Cresson, named in 1991 by François Mitterrand, forced out after a rocky tenure. She's still bitter about it, wishing Elisabeth Borne bien du courage. That's French for lots of luck, you're going to need it. Elisabeth Borne, who paid tribute to Cresson at that handover ceremony with her predecessor on Monday.
I cannot help but have a thought for the first woman to hold this position, Edith Cresson.
Edith Cresson. Et peut-être je voudrais
I would like to dedicate this nomination to all the little girls and say to them, go for your dreams. Nothing must stop the fight for a woman's place in our society.
pour la place des femmes dans notre société.
So Léa Chamboncel, it's a big deal being a woman.
Oh yeah, it's a big deal being a woman in general, and it's a huge deal being a woman in politics. And it's even worse when you try to go further up and you try to have responsibilities and you try to break down the glass ceiling. And this is what Borne just did. And I think indeed what she's saying, what Edith Cresson said, that she wishes her a lot of luck. Me too, because I'm afraid that she will face a lot of difficulties, that she will be attacked on anything because she's a woman, and also she will have to prove that she has all the competence, which she proved before. But we can hear already some people saying, yeah, but she never was elected. That's also why she's running for an election, because as a prime minister,
she's running for
the first time,
member of parliament
for the first time in Calvados. Yes, yeah. So that's going to be interesting to look up. And also, we need to remember that it's a temporary government, and maybe within a month she will be gone. So, the battle is not over for her yet.
If the left wins. So, Clea Chakravarti, I'm seeing on my Facebook timeline from friends, some women who are a little bit irked that it's still a big deal, the fact that she's a woman. Does it matter?
Well, as Léa rightly pointed out, it's a bit of an event, but probably more an event for France, because as we know, in many other countries there are women who are in politics and holding high positions. What I think is interesting, and I just want to add on what Léa just said, it matters because there's the glass ceiling, but there's also something called the glass shift. which has been underlined by one of our researchers, Sarah Saint-Michel from Paris 1, who shows that university, yeah, of course, who says that basically this glass shift or glass cliff, rather, it's kind of a trap for any woman who gets into a higher position, because as soon as she gets there, the fact is, Elisabeth Borne is one example, she can fall very easily. It will be very easy for others to point out that, well, that she's not good enough. And that's something that has been used, for instance, against Valérie Pécresse or Anne Hidalgo, whether you like their politics or not. It's a very interesting tendency that is being observed.
Sandra Gozzi, do you agree that female politicians go in for more criticism, more ridicule?
Well, I heard a lot, talking a lot about glass ceiling. I think that in the case of Elisabeth Borne, the glass ceiling in Matignon now it is air flow, and I'm very positive about this. About her capacity. I'm very glad about this choice. It's still, for women, it's still more difficult, but I mean, it's totally different from the period of Edith Cresson. I remember a little bit that period because I was a very young student in France, in Paris, and at the time, Edith Cresson was totally surrounded by sexism and cynical approach to her. I don't think that now it is the case for Elisabeth Borne. I think I would say that, I mean, it's not even a glass ceiling because with there we are continuing to building up our home in the context of Macron approach. And after all, Elisabeth Borne doesn't fall from the sky, but comes up after 5 years of very good experience into ministerial posts. So, I mean, I think that what is on her side is a clear competence. She's very competent. I mean, she knows her subject, and I think she's very equipped also to face the criticism that can be around there. And after all, I mean, it was big time that also in a country like France, after 5 prime ministers, female prime minister in the European Union, it was a big time that France could give this sign. So I'm positive, and yes, there will be criticism against her, but she's very well equipped.
Just to remind our viewers, there's 27 states in the European Union, but it's far from gender parity when it comes to the top posts. Of those currently in office, you can see it on this map, they all hail from Northern Europe, and we're including here the President of the European Commission as well, if you include her, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Oh, they've put Iceland as well on that map. In its outgoing government, the French had near parity, 47% of women. These are statistics that were compiled last October. They put France near the top of EU rankings. It's only 1/3 when it comes to Italy. Just a quick question on this, a side issue here. Sandra Gozzi, in your native Italy, the fact that there hasn't been yet a female prime minister, is that just because the right person hasn't come around, or is there a bigger problem there?
Well, I'm very proud of because on the cabinet in which I was a member in Italy in 2014, it was the first time with Matteo Renzi that there was a full parity in ministerial posts between female and male, and I think it was a very important signal that at the time we gave in Italy. At the moment, Italy had the best prime minister it could get, is Mario Draghi. Yes, I mean, he's a man, but he's very competent. Certainly, I think that it would be a very good sign in Italy if in the future we had a female prime minister or a female president, but not with the method that it was tried before the re-election of Sergio Mattarella. I mean, a debate on looking for a female candidate at the presidency. No, looking for competent person at the presidency of the Republic, and there could have been many competent female candidates. So, I mean, I think that the time in which Italy will have a female prime minister or a female president of the Republic, the day, it will be a very good day for Italy and for me personally.
Yeah, of course, Gesine Weber, in your native Germany, that argument went, that discussion is long over. Are you surprised we're all talking about this again today?
Not at all, because I also recall that there was kind of a backdrop of the number of female parliamentarians after the last German elections. So really gender equality and parity in parliaments is far from being achieved in many countries in Europe. And this is also what we see in France right now. I mean, we have, on the one hand, you can say, yes, of course, the number is going up. We have 40%. More or less of female deputies. Yes, but it's 40% and it's 50% of the society.
It was 15. It was 18 a decade ago. So it's gone up a lot.
It's gone up, and this is a good movement, but it's still not enough because women just make up 50% of the society. So it would also be good if they are represented by 50% in parliaments. And when we are looking at other positions in France that women occupy in politics, we also see that, for example, only 20%, so 1 out of 5 mayors is a woman. And we see that only 1 out of 5 departmental presidents is a woman. And that looks much better for instance, the deputies or the French deputies in the European Parliament. Here we have almost perfect gender parity. But I'm not surprised that we are still talking about that, because we see that particularly when it comes to elections, and also when we are not looking at the government level, but for instance also at top positions in government, at the positions of advisors, there are so many men that there is still a long way to go until the glass ceilings are broken.
Yeah, there was the strategy session that took place. There was a bit of a shock because it was a strategy session at the presidential palace a couple of years back, where there were 12 men sitting around the table, and that was something that was brought up. Let's look at the new prime minister on her merits, Elisabeth Borne, who back in 2014 was appointed chief of staff for the then environment minister, who was none other than former socialist presidential candidate Ségolène Royal. Borne, who would then go on to serve as environment minister in her own right under Emmanuel Macron before becoming transport and then labor minister. Here you see her visiting the Mer de Glace near the Italian and French border near Mont Blanc with the president back in 2020. Léa Chamboncel, Elisabeth Borne, does she represent change? Well, she does with her gender. We all agree on that. But does she represent change or continuity when it comes to policies, when you compare to her two predecessors as prime minister?
I think she represents exactly what Emmanuel Macron wanted. It's a strategy that the nomination of Elisabeth Borne is very strategical for him, because I have the feeling that at some point we were talking about the fact that Marisol Touraine could be appointed prime minister, or Catherine Vautrin that could be appointed prime minister. But what Emmanuel Macron did is that he chose someone that was in his government already for 5 years, someone that is well known by all the candidates for the legislative elections, also for Renaissance. Because what I feel like is that Emmanuel Macron understood that his priority now is to consolidate his base, his electoral base, and he has no choice. So what he did is that he gave a bit to the progressive, saying, I'm appointing a woman, and he gave a bit to the right, more liberal, saying, I'm appointing a woman, but she's liberal, and she's gonna be dealing with all the dossiers.
Even though she's got even though I don't know whether or not she was a member of the Socialist Party, but she certainly worked with the Socialists.
She was never a
before.
member. She just worked as a chief. She started actually with Jospin in 1991 because she was a technical advisor when Edith Cresson was actually prime minister, which is interesting. She was technical advisor to Jospin when he was at the Ministry of Education, and then she continued. She's a good civil servant, but she has no political will. She doesn't want to play a big role on politics. She's rather she doesn't want to take the light. She doesn't go front. She's not known for her charisma, for instance. Like, she's not charismatic. She's not known for She doesn't want to play a political role as Edouard Philippe actually wanted to play it, and he's playing it because he's dealing with his new party, with the Renaissance, in order to have some seats in the parliament.
And he's created a new party that's
Yep,
right
it's called
for now
Horizon, yeah.
allied with.
And he actually dealt that they could have 58 seats at the parliament if the majority gets elected. So, and Emmanuel Macron is almost sure that Elisabeth Borne won't do anything like that to him.
So, is Prime Minister, the job of Prime Minister under France's current constitution, an important one, or is it a glorified chief of staff to the president?
Well, it's a complicated answer because what our scholars have shown so far, for instance, is that especially under Macron, Emmanuel Macron's office, the role of the president, the hyper-presidentiality, the way they call it, has increased.
That was a term coined when Nicolas Sarkozy became.
It's true, but it's like I would say it's even worse, or it's even more the case with Emmanuel Macron.
Absolutely.
Like he just actually went ahead, and I want to quote here Emilien Warvial, who did a very good piece for us on this, saying that Emmanuel Macron is actually perhaps the heir of Nicolas Sarkozy in his politics, in his way of dealing with French politics. And just to come back on what you just said earlier, both of you, all of you, about Elisabeth Borne, it's true that she's not a politician, and in that way she is in the continuity of Emmanuel Macron, but it's also important to remind that I believe, again, other scholars have pointed that out, that she's also not a feminist. And why?
What do you mean by not a feminist?
Well, she's not really bringing on the table like a strong feminist advocacy. She's not being part of very strong NGO associations like perhaps other civil servants could have been. Just to go back a little in the past, 2017, Emmanuel Macron was seen as a candidate of change because he was deemed to put on the table people coming from civil society, people with unconventional background. And what we're seeing here is someone who is very conventional. And just to quote Luc Rouban on this, yes, there's more parity today in Parliament, as you rightly pointed out, but let's look at where they come from, these women. And they all come from a certain kind of mold. They all come from the elite. They all come from the same professional background. And this is also the case with Elisabeth Borne. So it's going to be quite interesting to see whether this sustains or not during Macron's second mandate, second office. And, well, what's been shown so far.
But what do you want in your prime minister? Don't you want somebody? I mean, she used to head, for instance, the public transport company for the Paris region. She's proved a tough negotiator with unions when she was labor minister. Isn't that what you want in a prime minister?
Well, I believe that French people are anyway going to go for the elections very soon, so it's going to be interesting to see how they vote. But yes, she's a good professional for sure. I mean, she's a civil servant. She's very good in her job. But it's interesting to see whether she has any political will, as Léa said earlier or not. And it says a lot about the relationship between the prime minister and the president again.
Sandra Gauthier, I can't help asking you, because Léa Chambourcel spelled out some of the names of the others who'd been up for consideration. According to investigative newspaper Le Canard Enchaîné, Emmanuel Macron had to be convinced by his inner circle not to opt for a prime minister who was more aligned with Nicolas Sarkozy's conservatives and instead go with Elisabeth Borne. Your thoughts on the matter?
Well, Emmanuel Macron decided, as any president of the Republic, on his own, a choice, an important choice like the Prime Minister. So I doubt very much that he needed to be convinced on this profile or on that profile. He made his choice, it was his choice, and it was only his choice. In my view, and knowing also Emmanuel Macron, I think, as I say, did the right choice. There must be a complicity, there must be a full trust. There must be a fundamental political understanding between a President of the Republic and a Prime Minister in any system, but especially in the system of the Fifth Republic in France. So it's perfectly normal that a President that has just re-won the elections he chooses as Prime Minister a woman who he knows, who has worked very well in his cabinet for 5 years. And you know, I mean, this debate on a technician, technocrat profile, civil servant, I mean, I heard so many times also in other countries, when you run for a legislative election, When you are appointed as prime minister, you are by definition, by role, a politician. Maybe you haven't been a politician before. Maybe you haven't done life. You haven't lived the partisan life. You haven't been active in a political party. But I mean, when you are appointed prime minister, you play a political role and you become a politician. A politician is not by birth.
A politician,
by choice
Sandro Gozzi,
and by opportunities.
Sandro Gozzi,
So,
a politician, but
and she embodies, yeah.
I was going to say a politician, but at the same time, you heard Léa Chamoncel say part of the job description for being a French president, and we haven't seen since the time of Jacques Chirac, is that you're going to have a boss who has a hands-on approach, so she can't overshadow at any point the president.
But a prime minister is not meant to overshadow the president. If the prime minister has pursued the objective of overshadow the president, it's a recipe for tensions, and it shouldn't be like that. A prime minister is there to embody the fundamental political choices, orientations of the president, and I think that Elisabeth Borne embodies the choice and the new orientation on full employment, on ecological transition, on fight against social inequalities, on Europe, on equal opportunities. Equal opportunities, Emmanuel Macron during this election has said again that even in this mandate, equal opportunities will be a pillar of his strategy. And I think that Elisabeth Borne embodies all this on one hand. On the other hand, she's got the profile and the competence also to implement this fundamental political orientation. And this is exactly, in my view, what a prime minister should do.
Gesine Weber?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what is absolutely worth mentioning in this context is that the prime minister in the French political system is always what is in French called le fusible. So basically, if the president does things that are not well received in the population, there is a good chance that the one who is going to take the bullets for that
The fall
is going
guy.
yeah, exactly, or the scapegoat,
In this case, the fall
to some
girl.
extent, is going to be the prime minister. So that is something one also needs to be aware of when we're talking about the role of the prime minister. So you both already mentioned that it will most likely not be the most or the easiest job to do here in the next 5 years. And of course, Macron already pointed out from the very beginning that he wants a prime minister who is going to manage, for instance, the green transition portfolio. She will most likely also have to deal with the pension reform, social inequality challenges here. While also we know that we have kind of a neat division of labor when it comes to foreign policy, which will most likely be Macron's domain, everything related to defense, of course, as well. But in the end, like, Macron will always have the last word. And if things are going very badly here, as a prime minister, you always have to be ready to be replaced.
Yeah, it's a kind of like Football Manager. Let's break down some of those issues, because what we're now doing here is looking ahead to what's going to be the big talking points on the campaign trail. No grace period from the left, not with its leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon urging voters to give his side a majority in next month's legislative elections.
Sa nomination
Her nomination starts from its inception with a sort of attempted deceit. Miss Borne is said to be a woman of the left. Perhaps she may think so, but we don't grant her that label.
Mais nous ne lui accordons pas ce label.
Yeah, and this with a nod to her stint as Labour Minister, where there was a reform of unemployment insurance that's being denounced by the left. The same accusation of social brutality also coming from a far right that's trying to court those same working class voters.
Madame Borne, c'est Monsieur Macron bis.
Mrs. Borne is just another Macron.
C'est le même profil, ce sont les mêmes idées.
She has the same background, same ideas, the same cold administrative and technocrat vision, the same brutal ways.
Brutale. Donc, je pense qu'Emmanuel Macron l'a choisi.
Macron chose her to carry out this social brutality, and this is going to be seen very soon with the retirement reform.
Pouvoir s'exprimer très rapidement, à mon sens, par l'intermédiaire de cette réforme des retraites.
Now, knowing that in the presidential campaign, Emmanuel Macron's opposition honed in on his idea of a pension reform to come, raising the retirement age to 65. Did he do right by picking his labor minister to be his next PM?
There again, it's the way he's trying to consolidate his base. It's the only reason I see for him to take this choice, because he was not trying to convince the right voters or the left voters, because he understood that he lost them. He lost them with the election. The Nini or
he had this mantra of 2017. I wanted to take the best of the left and the best of the right.
I think it's over. I think it's over, and also because the right has gone far right, basically, and what was center, middle right is with him, and the left has gone a bit more far left.
But you say it's over, but Gesine Weber was just pointing out some of the issues where he's hoping to gain some traction, social issues, environmental issues.
No, it's too late. I really believe it's too late. It's too late because he tried to do that during the elections right before the second round. He actually tried to say so. He said he would coming back. He was considering to come back on the pension reform. That was the first time in 5 years that he was actually saying that he would go down to 64, and then it's not. Well, the discussion has to continue, that he was not very radical on that anymore, but as he was for 5 years. So he understood that it was useless, that he was not elected with that kind of strategy of trying to please some people on the right and please some people on the left, because this doesn't work anymore. It worked in 2017, and today Emmanuel Macron is sort of facing a midterm election, because he's in office, but he's in office with a parliament that is his majority, and that's the first time in the history of the fifth constitution. So it's very interesting.
First time that a sitting president's been re-elected with a sitting majority. Yeah.
So this is interesting to see, and I really see it as a midterm elections. So, and I do believe that a lot of voters, when they will go and vote on the 12th and 19th of June, they will see it as a really third turn of the presidential elections as well.
If it's a midterm election, Gesine Weber, that's not good. Incumbent parties don't do very well normally in midterm elections. But do you agree that it's a lost cause? All those people, not from the hard left, but from the center left, who perhaps lent their votes to Jean-Luc Mélenchon in the first round, are they necessarily going to vote a left wing in legislative elections?
Well, when we are having a look at current surveys, then we basically see that the pattern that we have seen emerging during the presidential elections, constituting three blocks in France, one centrist, liberal, let's call it Macronist bloc, then a bloc at the extreme right, and a leftist to extreme left bloc. These patterns are represented in the current surveys, because we see that what is called NUPES, or
this coalition of left-wing parties.
Exactly. Now it's leading in the surveys. So Macron was very well aware that he won because of the vote of the left-wing voters, and not because people trusted his program. So that is the key point. And indeed, I think, if I may finish on that point, these upcoming elections are indeed midterm elections. And I've heard many analysts arguing that when we're looking at historical continuity, the French have always been kind of willing to give the parliamentary majority to the parliament they just elected.
You've just elected me president, give me a mandate.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the case for many years. But I think when we rely on this pattern for this year, we're really oversimplifying the analysis.
So I'll play devil's advocate with you, Cléa Chakraverty, because yes, if you look at the opinion surveys that look at the general population. But it's a two-round system, the legislative elections, just like the presidential election. And it's not one election. It's not proportional representation. It's 577 elections. It's as many as there are constituencies. Does the system really put Emmanuel Macron behind, or does the system favor him?
That's a very tricky question, actually. I think there's something that needs to be taken into consideration. And I think like lots of media have discussed that, and we published a lot on this as well, is the phenomenon of abstention. There has been a huge no vote during the presidential election, including the one in 2017. We've seen that local elections, the local mayor, municipal elections were also not attracting a lot of people. And abstention as a phenomena, it has to be taken into consideration for this so-called third election.
So who does low turnout favor? Who does high turnout favor?
Well, it looks like, if I may just come back on a few facts that we recently published. For instance, people looking at the Yellow Vests movement needs to be, again, taking into account. I'm talking lead researchers by Frédéric Gontier, for instance, or Magali Della Souda, who published with us a couple of stories looking at how the Yellow Vests probably didn't vote, and they're not representative of the whole French population, but a certain fringe of population, which is also quite porous and would go perhaps towards the extreme right wing at some point or the extreme left at some other point, but because they also have very radical demands of change, which neither Macron is not taking into consideration at all. Change of the voting system, for instance. There are some other point is the citizen referendum initiative, which is something that is quite strongly a demand, and they want more participatory democracy as well. So whether this is going to lead to a vote in the election, in the legislative or not, is going to be quite interesting. There's another point is the living wage issue that you just mentioned. What some surveys are showing right now, and again, it's opinion surveys, so you have to be quite careful with that, but they're probably showing an incline to going for candidates who are going to defend those issues, living wages again, the RIC, the Citizen Initiative Referendum, but also ecology. I mean, we published recently a very good piece by Philippe Moati showing that on the survey that the researchers have done, 51% of the people surveyed said that they want an ecological society, not identitarian, not neoliberal. And again, the candidates today in the legislative who are going to defend those issues might gain attraction over a more, I would say, neoliberal candidate. But again, let's see.
Sandro Gozzi, we've had record high temperatures for a May 18th in parts of the southeast and southwest of France this Wednesday. Is Mother Nature conspiring against the president? The way things are going, if this drought keeps up here in France, the environment's going to be a big issue on the campaign trail, and the criticism leveled against Emmanuel Macron is that he hasn't been radical enough.
Well, no, I don't share what I've heard so far on some point, and I would like to come back on that. It is clear that Macron needs a prime minister like Elisabeth Borne, because he needs someone who is able to focus more on exactly those two issues that have been mentioned, and on which he wants to strengthen the policies and changing the method. Talking about the fight against social inequalities, talking also about the ecological transition and the ecological planning that Elisabeth Borne will have to do. I mean, to do really a calendar of targets to be reached, and I mean, the record hit that you are referring to will all be pushing more to, I mean, keep this commitment of the ecological planning, both at French level and at European level. Then I heard that, this word which is always used against Macron and against, now I heard Elisabeth Borne in France, neoliberal. I mean, first of all, I haven't really understood what that means. Neoliberal, certainly I wouldn't use this word to judge a government which has spent a huge amount of money, investing a huge amount of money in the COVID crisis, to support families, to support small and medium businesses. I wouldn't say that the social record of Macron and of Elisabeth Borne is not satisfactory if you look at the fact that we have a low record unemployment in France, both for young youth and in general, 7%. And these are all real concrete facts. And also, the reform of the insurance for unemployment, which is one of the reasons why Jean-Luc Mélenchon said that Elisabeth Borne we will continue with this policies against social priorities, etc. She has made, and Macron have made this system much more efficient. And the approach of the extreme left, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is a typical archaic and old-fashioned approach of the French left and extreme left, which have always pushed the left and the extreme left to lose with this approach. So I think that the legislative will be a fierce battle.
But do you agree with Léa Chamboncel that these do feel, because of the fact that he was re-elected with a sitting majority, that these are kind of like midterm elections, that people won't be approaching these legislative elections the way they would have approached them if he had been freshly, newly elected?
I don't think that the legislative election will be lived and will be felt by the French voters like neither a third round of the presidential election nor a midterm. I think that certainly there will be a strong push to provide the president a clear majority. I think that the debate which we will have will also help us to prove that many of the proposals of the alliance of the extreme left are not credible, because they are not supported by credible figures, because it is a program which is not meant to rule the country. It's a program that is meant to try to collect as many votes as possible to be a strong opposition. Jean-Luc Mélenchon doesn't have the real intention to rule France, believe me, because otherwise he wouldn't have proposed such a program which really lacks of credibility. So, we will see. I think that also in the French system, a system of, first past the post, 2 rounds in each constituency. Also the profile of the candidates counts a lot. Because the constituencies are small, because this time much more than in 2017, that is true. The voters will look also at the candidate of the presidential majority. In 2017, it was much easier for each candidate supporting Emmanuel Macron, because there was such a push of this new young president that it was much easier in the legislative elections. This time we will have to fight and won constituency by constituency, but this is also, we have worked a lot on the profile of those who are candidates in the different constituencies. So I don't think the fight will be easy, but I think that this will be much more the attitude with which the French voter will approach these legislative elections. And on the system, let me say this, that it's not true that Macron has never said that he's open to reform the system in the legislative election. On the contrary, one of the commitments that he has taken during this presidential campaign is, if he has a majority, he will propose to his majority and to all the other forces representing the French parliament to create a transpartisan committee exactly to discuss about institutional reform, including also possible proportional representation legislation,
which was a promise in 2017,
law for the legislative elections. Yeah, but this time there is a much stronger commitment toward, first of all, his allies. There is a method also. It is clear that it wasn't possible because the Senate mainly opposed, and the lesson that we have learned that you cannot even a reform which is largely demanded by the opposition mainly extreme left or extreme right, but I think that it is, a legitimate demand. It cannot be done against the opposition. We couldn't do it against the will of the Senate, because the Senate, I recall, there was a majority of the Republicans, of the right.
The conservatives blocked it.
Let me bring a good approach to say they control the bloc. It is good to say, let's create a transnational committee and let's discuss how to renew the Fifth Republic and how to reform also the legislative election system.
Gesine Weber, do you see a better chance of a reform and especially that introduction of at least a dose of proportional representation in the parliament? You heard earlier Clea mentioning parts of the population that don't feel represented in parliament.
Yeah, I fully understand this claim also because this majority vote that is really in place for the parliament tends to marginalize particularly smaller parties. And that is, of course, the downside of that system. So I also understand that this claim is largely shared among parties. However, it is highly questionable whether the other parties will find a way to work together with Macron or on this proposal, because we have to bear in mind that this would the change of the electoral law could also be done without a reform of the constitution if it is framed in a certain way. But however, the objective has always been to do a constitutional reform on that. And constitutional reform requires a significant share of French parliamentarians to agree. And I'm not sure whether it will be possible to come up with a proposal where, on the one hand, the National Assembly and the Senate, who both need to agree on that, will be willing to agree. So on the one hand, the objective is kind of shared among the different blocs, but I don't see, and I really don't see...
Partisan politics will get in the way, is what you're saying.
To be honest, I don't see Rassemblement National align with Macron just because they also want a proportional voting system. That's completely illusional.
All right. Clea Chakravarti earlier mentioning how politics have become more polarized in France. You have now three big blocs emerging, the far left, the far right, and the middle ground. And we heard Emmanuel Macron stake out his claim to that middle ground when he spoke to supporters at the foot of the Eiffel Tower on election night last month.
Today, you've made the choice of a humanist project, ambitious for the independence of our country, of our Europe, a project of republican values, a social and environmental project, a project based on work and creativity, a project that frees up our cultural, academic and entrepreneurial forces.
Léa Chamboncel, staking out the middle ground, and the middle ground, if you look at surveys over the years, the middle ground is big in France. The hard left, the far right, they occupy a lot of airtime on television shows like this one. But a lot of French people, they want stability.
Yeah, that's right. And that's also what Emmanuel Macron has been surfing on for the election. Like, he didn't really do any type of campaign. He wasn't campaigning till the first round of the election. His first political speech was on the night of the first round of the election. So that was interesting to see that he was not campaigning. He was just pretending that things were how they are, and they needed to continue on like that.
The message you heard in that clip, how much does that resonate?
Well, I think what we need to rewind a bit and see that the results of these elections, of the presidential election, is the absolute collapse of the mainstream parties in France, which were le Parti Socialiste et les Républicains. Just to give you an idea, in 2017, both parties on the first round of the election, if you additionate both parties, you had 26% of the ballots. In 2022, it was 7%. So it's absolute collapse. That was also a strategy of Emmanuel Macron. He managed to take the opportunity of helping them to collapse even more, basically, by appointing...
Or has he just created the equivalent of a grand coalition in Germany, which is a centrist party that has a few people from the Conservatives and a few people from the Social Democrat side?
I don't really know. I think he was... Well, yes, I do know, actually. When you look back at his first mandate, you see that he's been extremely liberal, that indeed they actually went, they made some intervention, like economical intervention for during the crisis, but I don't think this would have happened, the public spending, if there were no crisis, no pandemic, obviously. So he's been quite liberal and quite right. For me, he's right, he's conservative and he's liberal. And he's not... anything that left voters could be identifying to. So, and even center-left, I think center-left are more, they were more voting against Le Pen, obviously, not for him. And a lot of them were considering voting for Yannick Jadot, that was maybe the best choice for center-left, but certainly not Emmanuel Macron after 5 years in office.
All right, we shall see. In any case, the first round of those legislative elections on June the 10th. Much more to talk on. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank Léa Chamboncel, Clea Chakravarty, Gesine Weber, Sandro Gozzi for joining us from Brussels. We want to thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.